warm welcome for Professor Verspoor.
Thank you so much, Nuria. Yeah, sorry for the long-winded, both formal and informal bios there. But yeah, I think it's always good to know a little bit about where people are coming from, and definitely my career path has been meandering and unusual, and happy to talk about that as well. I probably won't take the full hour to talk about what I'm going to talk about, so I'd like to, just leave time for discussing things at the end. Mainly because what I'm going to talk to you about is really sort of hot off the press kind of work that we've been doing. And as you can tell from the title, COVID-C, what we've been doing is very much in reaction to the current situation that we're all living in with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I see that Larry has left, but Larry will recognize some of the foundations of the work that we've been doing here in work that I did when I was at the University of Colorado School of Medicine working with Larry. So I'm going to present to you the Scientific Evidence Explorer, which is a new web application system that we've been developing, which is really designed to help scientists and clinicians navigate and keep on top of the literature, specifically in COVID. And the rationale for this is, of course, the usual story that I think probably most of us are aware of, that for COVID in particular, there has been a massive rush to get publications out and essentially disseminate evidence as it's been coming in a very dynamic way, in a very emergent way, for the COVID-19 virus. And so the NLM very quickly pulled together LitCovid. In fact, the primary person behind this is my former PhD student, Qinyu Chen, working with Zhong Lu at the National Library of Medicine. And so you can see from this graph that, in February, we were already starting to see case reports and kind of early research on the virus. And over time, the amount of literature related to COVID-19 has really been growing. And I just as an aside, last week I organized for the Association for Computational Linguistics a workshop on natural language processing for COVID-19. And we were completely overwhelmed by submissions. So, it was a workshop. We were expecting maybe 30 papers. We didn't give people a lot of warning that we were doing it. We announced it in early April, and we got our first submission on April 11th. And then by the time we closed the submission site on the 30th of June, we got 75 submissions. And it's just remarkable that even in natural language processing, which you wouldn't necessarily think of being as the primary place where people would be jumping into trying to understand COVID, it clearly has been grasping people's interest. So lots and lots of research coming out. And this, of course, begs the question of how we can stay on top of it. Now, the story isn't really particular to COVID. And this is a chart that I based on counts in PubMed over the years. As you can tell, I last updated it in 2016, which is a long time ago, but the trends are pretty similar. And so that exponential growth in the literature and the sort of cumulative effect of that means that there's an incredible amount of information that's available in the scientific literature, in publications, that then creates a challenge of how to keep on top of it. And people in the text mining community and in collaboration with people with the Bio-Ontologies community have really been working to try to delve into this literature and be able to extract information from it in meaningful ways in order to make the information more findable, in order to support biocuration, in order to support a range of activities that really require us to do some text mining and some natural language processing to transform the unstructured information that's available through language in the literature into much more meaningful and structured, actionable information. So we've been working on that for a very long time. I personally started working on that in about 2003. So it is not really a new thing, but it turns out that there are actually very few scientists who are aware of this. And so I found myself talking to a journalist named Jeffrey Brainard in early May, who was curious about essentially what were the options for the scientists. And I love this image that they came up with of this kind of tsunami or this wave of papers that is about to come down on the scientists in this boat. It's a great image. For me, it was particularly fun to see this because that geeky high school that Nuria mentioned in my intro actually adopted the wave of the future image as the kind of motto for the school when I was in high school. So it had a personal connection on many levels. But you know, the idea behind this article was, okay, there's all these papers out there. You know, how on earth can we navigate the sea of papers, and how can we leverage technology to help us do that? And one of the points that I made to Jeffrey was that we've been doing a lot of work on the back end of text mining and developing the methods and the algorithms for doing information extraction, identity recognition, relation extraction, and really doing that piece of trying to structure the information in the literature. But we haven't had nearly as much emphasis on the tools that users can use. And you know, most medical researchers or biomedical researchers really rely on the search interface in either Google Scholar or in PubMed directly. And those tools are quite specific and limiting in various ways. And clearly they're not finding those tools good enough, or we wouldn't have this question being asked by science. I just did think it was amusing that I really had to educate the journalists that actually we have been trying to work in this space for so long. And I think the fact that that it's not common knowledge that there are tools that dig deeper into the content of text really reflects the state of the tools, that the tools, obviously people aren't using them because they're not exactly what they need. And so that got me thinking about what we might be able to do in order to kind of bring the text mining more effectively to users and create an environment where they could engage more deeply with what's now a growing and large body of literature. In probably late March, a Kaggle task was announced around, sorry, that's my alarm, that's when I normally wake up. A Kaggle task was announced around a collection of COVID-19 literature that was being collected in partnership with the Allen Institute for AI, also including the National Library of Medicine, Microsoft, and a number of other partners. And they were collecting articles on both COVID-19 and other related coronaviruses. And so they then made that research data set available, and this includes not only kind of formal publications, peer-reviewed publications indexed in PubMed, but also medRxiv and arXiv and bioRxiv, other resources where the literature was made available, and invited people in the community, the data science community, to have a go and try to find ways to gain insights about COVID-19 through the lens of the information that was coming out in the literature. And so we decided to turn our tools and our awareness of how to do text mining to this data set, And that led us to designing COVID-C. Along the way, there's also been extensive interest from the information retrieval community directly. And so NIST, which is the organizer of the kind of famous information retrieval challenges called TREC, the Text Retrieval Evaluation Conference, which has been running for decades, pulled together a team to very quickly do relevancy judgments over the CORD-19 collection, so that same collection that the Allen Institute for AI was building, and then invite people to submit information retrieval results over a set of predefined test queries in order to compare and evaluate different methods for information retrieval. And we can see through developments in the information retrieval community that search is getting a lot smarter. And so improved search is of course part of the answer to how to deal with all of the literature. We want to be able to type a query into a search box and get back a list of relevant articles. And we can see by looking at TREC over the decades that the algorithms are becoming much more sophisticated. They're using neural methods to improve query processing, to improve the ranking algorithms. They're also adding in some user-oriented capabilities like paragraph highlighting to kind of focus the attention of the searcher to the specific parts of what's probably a long document where the terms that match the query appear. And so, search is definitely part of the answer to how to deal with this growing body of literature. But from my perspective, it's only the starting point of a process of exploring the literature. And we really needed to think about ways to dig a bit deeper and go beyond this model of type a query into a search box, get back a list of search results, and then scan through page after page of results in order to find what you're looking for. There have been some attempts to layer a bit of structure over those search results, and so this is an example. There are a number of them, by the way, so this is not the only example, but this was a system that was developed very rapidly. In fact, it was an adaptation of a different literature searching tool called Mat Scholar. This one's called COVID Scholar, and it was developed at a national lab in the United States. And what they've done is, in addition to kind of the obvious metadata filters, was it peer reviewed or not? Where did it come from? Is it in PubMed? Is it in Elsevier? Where is it coming from? They added in some content specific features which involve essentially classification of the documents according to a number of different dimensions. And so this adds some structure to the search results, and a user that's interacting with this system, can narrow down their search to these specific classes that they might be interested in. So this helps. But again, I don't think it quite solves the complete need. There were many people trying to respond to the situation, and the Allen Institute for AI itself has a number of tools in their semantic scholar system that they very quickly adapted to the CORD-19 data set. And one of the key things that they did was to leverage named entity recognition. And so building on text mining tools that are able to identify particular entities or concepts in the literature, they essentially pre-processed all of the articles to find entities like genes and proteins, diseases, chemicals, mutations, and species, and the sorts of things that you can find in PubTator at the National Library of Medicine as well, which provides a visualization where you can highlight the particular terms in those categories, which is one lens into the literature. And at the Allen Institute for AI, they started thinking about new ways to visualize the co-occurrences of these concepts. And so here's an example of where there's a connection between remdesivir and 2019 nCoV. That then is used to filter a set of a set of results in the COVID-19 data set, and limiting the results to the papers that have that particular connection. And so you can see visually, you know, kind of what the key diseases and chemicals are that are mentioned in the search results in response to a particular query, and look at the connections to other papers. And I think this is really a step in the right direction, and surfaces connections and relationships that are implicit in the text and maybe not so obvious from a standard search interface. So we wanted to go in that same direction, but we did things a little bit differently. So our work also builds on concept recognition and entity recognition. And this is an example from the CRAFT corpus that I worked on when I was in Colorado, the Colorado Richly Annotated Full Text corpus, which has a number of different ontology terminologies labeled across the corpus. And so we, in the process of working with the CRAFT corpus, we explored and developed a number of tools for recognizing ontology concepts. And, you know, this really views the ontologies primarily as a vocabulary resource, and then thinking about how to map those ontology concepts into the literature involves trying to deal with some of the linguistic variability that we find in the literature. So in this example, I'm trying to show the relationship between gene ontology terms, this particular gene ontology term for membrane budding, and how it actually is expressed in the text. And so there are a couple of examples here in red where we have an exact string match between the term and the actual names or synonyms that appear in the ontology record for this Go term. So vesicle formation also occurs here, but these other examples, vesiculation process, vesiculate as a verb, budding of vesicles, these are all variants which map to this same term, but obviously are not expressed in a way that is anticipated by the terminology that's collected in the record. And so we need to have strategies that are robust to that linguistic variation. And you know, there's been a whole body of work around how to do that, which we're revisiting recently with all of the developments in machine learning, and continue to make progress on. But our objective for this particular project wasn't to do that better. It was just to actually bring together the tools that were already doing that. Because COVID-19 obviously has a lot of clinical information, and I think that was the primary focus of most of the information needs, certainly in the early period. I think that's evolving now. We actually decided to use a tool built on top of the Unified Medical Language System from the National Library of Medicine again, a tool called MetaMap, which is pre-configured to recognize clinical concepts. And so here's an example of a short text that is very, very heavily annotated by running the text through MetaMap. And you can see from this that there are you know, a very large number of different kinds of ontological concepts that are reflected in this. So information related to patients, quantitative concepts, temporal concepts, findings that have to do with to support diagnosis or symptoms, organ or tissue function, and so on. And so the MetaMap provides us with a way of jumping straight into the terminology resources that are important for structuring the information in the literature, so that we're not just treating it as what you might know as a bag of words model, where we just look at individual words in isolation without really understanding the phrases or the relationships between them. The UMLS itself is massive, so has over 5 million terms in it from over 100 terminologies, 1 million concepts which summarize those terms. So essentially they're sort of an average of 5 synonyms per concept. And then there's 16 million relations that capture. And this is data from a few years ago, so it's probably even bigger now. They've attempted to provide an ontological layer over that terminology by defining 135 higher level categories and summarizing those 16 million relations that are in the meta thesaurus into about 7,000 relations at that kind of higher ontological level. So that's a really important resource. And, you know, UMLS is really powerful because it integrates a large number of other resources which are under development through the gene ontology, the medical subject headings, OMIM, Mendelian, forgetting what it stands for now, genetic information, SNOMED CT, which is medical clinical terminology, NCBI taxonomy, which is species information, the foundational model of anatomy. So all of these resources are available through the UMLS and therefore available to be identified via the MetaMap tool. Just a little bit more detail on the kind of structure. It includes lexical information, so it has names and synonyms and different strings that correspond to particular concepts. Yeah, and here we can see again that sort of 5-to-1 kind of relationship between the terms and the concepts. And then there are a number of different, because MetaMap is a meta thesaurus is a meta vocabulary integrating terminology from multiple resources. It actually reflects the original terminology in the original sources as well. And there's a very human and now a semi-automatic process to connect all of the terminology in these different vocabularies. So it's been a huge amount of work that the National Library of Medicine has done, and it's a phenomenal resource for us in trying to structure concepts in the literature and in clinical text as well. And as I said earlier, you know, it adds its own semantic layer on top of the concepts that are absorbed from the underlying sources, and this is very useful for structuring the information. We're not using it yet, by the way, for the purposes of the COVID-C tool, but that is definitely something that we want to do. Okay, so using the MetaMap tool, which connects into all of this vocabulary in the UMLS, we pre-processed the entire COVID-19 literature collection and had an index over concepts rather than only individual words in the literature. And with that as a foundation, you can already imagine a more semantic way of searching, which is to allow people to search through that terminology. And in fact, IBM, in their response to COVID-19, built exactly that. So they built this tool called the COVID-19 Navigator, which allows people to search with UMLS concepts. So I've typed in chloroquine here, and it tells you what are all the possible terms in the UMLS that correspond to that particular word that I've typed in, and then by selecting a particular term that you're interested in from that list, the tool will then retrieve the articles that contain that concept. So by pre-processing the literature, giving it this kind of conceptual semantic layer, we can now have a more semantic approach to searching, which abstracts away some of that linguistic variation that we saw before. And so this is I think, quite a more natural way for many biomedical researchers and clinicians to access the literature, because they think in terms of those concepts. They don't think in terms of the individual words necessarily. So this is a step in the direction of bringing out the kind of deeper semantic content of the literature. The other thing that's really important in clinical research is the concept of randomized controlled trials. In fact, arguably, randomized controlled trials are the entire basis of evidence-based medicine in modern medicine. And the key structures around that are this PICO framework of defining what the population or the patient or the problem that is being studied. Then what is the intervention being studied, and that's typically a drug or some other kind of treatment. Who is the comparison or control group? Essentially, what is the population that doesn't have the problem that you're going to use to examine the effectiveness of the intervention through the scientific method, and then what's the outcome of interest that you're going to be measuring. And so every randomized controlled trial effectively conforms to this basic structure. And observing that, we thought that it would be valuable to, in addition to the concepts and the kind of semantics layer of the concept space provided by the UMLS, that we should also aim to capture the key elements of population intervention and outcome in structuring the information in the literature. Because this is how clinicians really think. They want to know, what is the evidence for a particular treatment? What is the evidence for a particular diagnosis or management of patient? We have a resource that was made available by Byron Wallace and colleagues, which actually annotated a number of biomedical articles specifically for this notion of PICO. And so they provided the EBM NLP, the evidence-based medicine NLP corpus, which has interventions and participants or population outcomes all labeled. And so leveraging that, we trained a BioLSTM CRF model. I'm not going to go into the details, but essentially it's a sequence tagging model that allows us to recognize those core PICO elements in the literature. In fact, it's just PIO because the control group is often not entirely relevant to the question that's being asked. So So we now have our MetaMap tool to recognize UMLS concepts, and we have our PICO spans, and we applied both of those tools to the COVID-19 literature. And so the question became, okay, great, we have concepts and we have PICO spans, how do we combine them? And so we decided to create what we call PICO concepts. And this really is a coupling of the PICO analysis with the UMLS concept recognition. And the basic idea was for every document, we did our PICO span extraction. We found where there were particular parts of the text that corresponded to those PICO categories. We also, in parallel, did our UMLS concept recognition and did some abstraction of that into medical subject headings. So we used the medical subject headings as essentially a subset of the UMLS that we were focusing on, just to not have an overwhelming number of concepts for this particular purpose. And then we looked at essentially concepts that were inside of the particular PICO spans. So what we're trying to do here is associate the UMLS concepts with particular dimensions of the clinical evidence. And this then provided us with those this is my little schematic for trying to show that we have concepts inside of particular PICO spans in the text. And then we kind of broke those up into pairwise combinations that we found in individual articles. So we transformed this kind of span-based view of the articles into a more relational view. And so this looks like essentially finding those pairwise associations between some concepts that's within the span of a population phrase, some concept that's in the span of an intervention phase, and similarly looking at the connections, or in fact it's just co-occurrences at the moment, between intervention concepts and outcome concepts. And here are some examples. So you find that there'll be a population that has a respiratory tract infection, and the intervention that's being examined is is a vaccine and the effectiveness of a vaccine. And then the outcome for that may be recovery. So does the person recover from the disease? Similarly, what's the impact of a quarantine intervention in children? And so the research was asking questions along these lines, and by kind of structuring and relating the concepts to these PICO concepts, we're able to sort of at a glance see what the essentially what the key elements are that correspond to the clinical question that is being discussed in a particular article. Okay, so we've done all that pre-processing, and you can think about that semantic search like the IBM Explorer, but it's still ultimately search, right? It's still typing something into a box and getting back a list of articles. And because of some work that one of my PhD students, Patrick Pang, did a few years ago on health information seeking behaviors, we had been thinking about this notion of exploratory search. And so this represents a shift from the kind of typical search and retrieve model into the notion of exploration. And particularly when people don't quite know what they're looking for, it turns out that iterative search often is unsatisfying. It doesn't help them with their information need, because, essentially in order to write a query into a search box, you have to have a fairly specific question or information need that you're going after. And you kind of know what you're looking for, even if you don't know where it is. And often, particularly with health concerns, people don't know what they're looking for. They don't have they don't know what diagnosis they have maybe, yet they just have some symptoms, and they want to kind of explore some space around what might be relevant to their particular symptoms. And in the context of COVID-19, I felt that the researchers were kind of in the same boat. This is a new disease. They don't really understand all of the characteristics. They don't quite know what they're looking for. They just want to know, what works. And so we thought that we would try to harness this notion of exploratory search in order to allow people to examine a wider range of information. And so we're building on this model that was actually developed back in 2009 of moving from this kind of very sort of, you start and you go narrow and you go narrow and you finally hone in on the information you're looking for, which is the model that PubMed search follows. So, you can build up your query, and if you look at systematic reviews, they have typically somewhere in the article a very, very, very carefully defined query with ands and ors and buts and Boolean combinations of search terms that really help them to narrow in on the specific set of literature that is relevant. That is not what the mode that most people were trying to use the COVID-19 literature for. They were really just going around trying to find what they were looking for. And so this seems to fit more into this exploratory search model, which isn't really supported by many tools. And in fact, in some further work that Patrick did, he noticed that people were often alternating between search and exploration. And so you start off searching for something, and then as you're reading the literature, or as you're reviewing the literature, you find a new concept that you then search for, and that will take you, from one place to an entirely new place in the literature. And so he noticed that people were effectively alternating between search and exploration, where that exploration was triggered by new information or unknown, something that was unknown to them, that they wanted, a concept that was unknown to them that they wanted to explore further. And in the study that he did, he found that actually most people do incorporate exploration into their search for health information. And there's only one group of searchers, and actually this is a mode that people might go in and out of, that are really only just skimming and satisfied by search alone. Okay, so where did this all lead to? This led to developing a system which combines search and exploration. And so what we built, looks like this. So we do start with a typical search in order to try to narrow down from the hundreds of thousands of articles that are potentially available to a more manageable set. And actually, we at the moment are limiting that search to 200 results. But 200 results is still too much for most people to digest. And so from the retrieved results, we provide a dashboard with some visualizations, which I'll explain to you in a bit more detail in a moment, where they essentially have different views of the retrieved results and can then much more interactively examine those results and get a sense of the concepts and the relationships that are expressed in that literature, which may then lead them to go back to the search and refine their search over that collection. And so we have various mechanisms for essentially, instead of searching over the entire collection, limiting your search to articles that you've collected along the way. We think of it as a briefcase. In fact, we use that icon in the tool to kind of store the articles that you're interested in keeping track of and exploring further. And so we have that element of search. We have exploration through the visual dashboard. Various views in that dashboard, and along the way you can pick up articles and add them to your briefcase, and then you can iterate. So we have searching, we have exploration, and we have the ability to support alternating between those two modes. So what does this look like? Building on those PIO, those PICO concepts and relationships, we have we use a Sankey diagram. This is a screenshot, so it's not active, but in the system itself, it is active. Essentially, you can hover over any of these links, and when you click on one of them, it brings up the paper that is that contains that particular relationship. And so if you look at this, you can very quickly see, aha, there's some connection between China and quarantine. And so that is maybe a link I want to examine further. And so if I click on that link right there, the papers that contain that relationship will pop up. And similarly for the relationships between interventions and outcomes. Now, if you look really closely here, you can see that there's still some issues with our concept recognition, and maybe our PICO annotation isn't perfect. And so there's still work to be done, but it gives, at a glance, you can see much more structure over the literature, and it's just easier to wrap your head around than trying to read through, several pages of abstracts. Similarly, we applied topic modeling, which is mathematically a model called latent Dirichlet allocation, which derives a mixture model between documents, topics, and words. And the topic models effectively provide a summary of salient themes that are in the retrieved collection. And what we do is we pre-process that and then for the particular set of results from the search in the active collection, we show which topics are represented in that particular subset of the literature. And again, this is interactive, and you can see by clicking on any one of these topics which particular terms or concepts are captured there. And we are doing this over concept space, not over word space. So you can see here like personal protective equipment or infection control. These are terms that are not just words. So we're building on the concept annotation. Finally, we have concept clouds that we build based on saliency or sort of relative frequency of terms across that concept space again, one for each document. And so very quickly, you can get a sense of the content of a particular article and what the salient terms are. And so this also provides a way for the user to browse through the search results more effectively. Just to say that we're not the only people going down this path. So what we've summarized here is actually a number of tools, including that COVID-19 navigator from IBM that I mentioned, and the LitCovid website itself, the LNAI tools for SciSite. There are a number of other ones. They all have various different capabilities. I showed you the SciSite visualization, so they definitely include some relations. The concepts that they have are relatively limited. They're just to those named entities. I think, you know, there's a few tools that leverage PICO, but not in any kind of visual or you know, kind of user-oriented way. We still have a lot that we want to do, and you know, I promised to talk about how we're going to leverage the ontologies, and we haven't done that as much as I would like. So we really do want to do that. So, for instance, in this PICO view, we would like to organize the concepts that we have there according to the hierarchical structures that are available in the ontologies, because that will help us to find the groupings of things more effectively and to show them more effectively. We also do want to have more targeted information extraction beyond the kind of overlaps that we're utilizing now by incorporating more sophisticated information extraction tools. And that could include things like analyzing information in tables that kind of summarize key results as well. I also want to explore stronger coordination between the views. So when I was in Colorado, we worked on a system called Bio-Jigsaw, where we used entities to connect documents together, and documents were in that framework a primary relational object, which they're not in our current implementation of COVID-C. And that's something I'd like to explore, is how we could leverage the relationships between documents more effectively, because we're not, again, right now we're looking at the relations within one document. And finally, we need to understand whether any of this is actually valuable to the people that we're trying to target. And so we're planning a user study once the system is a little bit more user-friendly. At the moment, it still has a few technical limitations. So that's it. I will leave it there. Oh, it did take me longer than I thought. So we've designed a system to help scientists navigate this, we hope, the sea of literature more effectively by going deeper into the contents of the text, building on the natural language processing methods, including ontology concept recognition and picospan detection, to structure the key information that's in that literature. And importantly, developing a kind of very visual system that incorporates the notion of exploration, building on all of that text analysis and natural language processing in order to expose the deeper content of the documents and thereby facilitate novel information discovery. And so I can't end without thanking the people who have really, really helped to make this all possible. So I had this crazy idea, you know, back in March, and the people who have done a huge amount of the work on the ground are listed here. In particular, Simon Suster, who did a lot of the work around the PICO span analysis, Julia, who did a lot of work related to the concept recognition and use of UMLS, and then transforming the concepts into those concept clouds and doing the topic modeling, and Siobhan, who built the actual web application. So he's a software engineer. He's also one of our undergraduate students who really made it all come to life, and then various other colleagues who gave input in a number of different ways. So that's it, and I'm happy to take questions.
So thank you so much, Professor Verspoor. It was an amazing talk. Let me check questions. Yes, we have questions. So first question would be, is anything from NLP in COVID-19 workshop available to the public?
It's almost all available to the public. So the yeah, I can put a link in the chat. Hang on. We use the open review system. So that was one of the key principles that we were using for that workshop, was to make sure that the work was not only publicly available but publicly commentable. And so, in fact, I don't think we had anybody who wasn't directly asked to review these papers. Review them, but nevertheless, they're all there. There we go. So that's now in the chat. So just a word of warning, we were not able to review all of the submissions that we got on the timeline that we had. The workshop was last week, so it was on the 9th of July. We received 50 submissions on the 30th of June. There was no way, I mean, I already basically didn't sleep for a week after we got those submissions, so there was no way we were able to review all of them. So that means we have the presentations that were selected in our presentation schedule, which is here. Whoops, no, hang on. Oh, the links might have only gone to, yes, okay. Fair enough. Oh, sorry, that's me not paying enough attention. There's a couple of links there. And then we also had a virtual poster session for the papers that we weren't able to review. And that is also on the website. Okay.
So thank you. Next question would be from Tiago Rubiana. The talk is going great. Thanks. Although most articles are indeed published in English, semantic tagging kind of allows articles from different languages to be tagged with the same identifiers. Have you worked with or seen any works integrating of knowledge from articles in different languages?
Well, so some of the works on our on that website for the NLP COVID workshop do address other languages. That's mostly in the social media context. So there was some work on Twitter that looks at tweets in Arabic and tweets in different countries. For the literature specifically, I'm not aware of anything for COVID-19. Of course, there are a number of works that address the biomedical literature and analysis of biomedical literature in other languages, including the workshop for machine translation, tasks related to translation of scientific literature, which I participated in organizing for a number of years as well. Now, that's not particularly focused on concept recognition. We actually have been doing some work on trying to leverage the parallel texts that are available in Wikipedia for trying to map UMLS concepts into the language of other languages other than English. And UMLS itself has a huge amount of vocabulary in other languages. And so that's actually one of the parameters you can give. And there is work that's looking at concept recognition using UMLS or via translation or via Wikipedia. That's all in progress. But I completely appreciate the comment, because it is, relatively speaking, an understudied problem.
Yes, thank you. We have another question. Some people at Wikidata have been trying to create a collaborative COVID-19 ontology. I just want to share this book of Sparkwell queries. Oh yeah, he's sharing, he or she, a book of Sparkwell queries about COVID-19 on Wikidata. It was mostly fed by reconciliation of databases with little to no direct text mining.
Great.
Yeah,
I'll have a look at it. So in the UMLS work the Wikipedia work that I just mentioned, we actually have been looking at Wikidata for that context as well. And so that I think Wikidata is a good resource. We haven't tied it in with this COVID-19 work. I'll put the link to that UMLS work. Oh, yeah, it went to everybody. Okay. There as well, in case you're interested. That's not been published yet, so we're still trying to get that published.
Okay. I think I don't see any more questions in the chats. Yeah, I have a question. So for PICO, have you been working or collaborating or developing it with domain experts, or?
So in that particular case, so there's two answers to that question. One is that for the data that we use for generating the PICO classifier, we used Byron Wallace's corpus, which he did do with annotate with experts. We didn't have to work directly with the experts in that case, because we had an existing resource, which is the value really of sharing annotated resources is huge for natural language processing applications. On the clinical side, we do have a number of projects that where we are working with domain experts. So one of the projects I'm involved with is, and that was actually the primary project that we did this work with, is through this ARC Training Center in Cognitive Computing for Medical Technologies. And in that context, we have a number of clinicians that are working with us. So we're working with someone named Professor Mark Cook, who's an epilepsy expert and clinician in that context, and working with a number of clinicians in Alzheimer's as well. And it's really critical actually for us to work closely with them in order for us to understand what their information needs are.
Excellent. And I think we have time only for the last question. Are there Chinese publications or social media that are of interest for COVID-19 NLP ontology work?
I imagine there are. I haven't looked. I've been so busy working on COVID-C that I haven't looked specifically at that. And I'm trying to think. We had at the NLP COVID workshop, we had a system for Japanese, which was really interesting, where they basically took news and reliable information resources from around the world and automatically translated them into Japanese and aggregated them and made them available. So it's not focusing on Chinese, but that was really about how you get information to people in their local language. And they used as one of their resources Chinese information resources. I'm just having a quick scan. No, we didn't have anything about Chinese in the workshop, but there may be in the submissions that we didn't review.